Well, yeah, so hello. I wanted to just start out with a few words about the book, etc. Would really like to acknowledge where we are, um, just regionally, and where this trip has taken us. That just and the understandings and teachings we've had from First Peoples right across this region, and everyone else as well. But yeah, our understandings of this place as a as a heartland of trade and embassy, and of being a heart of things, um, yeah, is quite. I mean, there's it's fairly close to what they were calling the smoke hole, what they were talking to me, and a lot of waterways. There's this idea that you can take a canoe from here to pretty much anywhere on the island, and that there are these just trade routes, arterial rivers that and ways of traveling that are just ancient, and that there's been an embassy and trade kind of practice and protocol going forever here. Since I got here, I've found out that we have a lot in common. Yeah, because we have the same sort of things. Yeah, so I sort of came here under embassy protocols from the Bunya Mountains, which is a place of big gathering of lots of people coming together. So my Indigenous Knowledge Systems lab, those of you who read the book, I finally did get to do a proper knowledge center. So we have a lab going with people from lots of different tribes, and we meet under those Bunya Mountains embassy protocols. And everywhere we go in the world, we take those protocols with us, and that's where we're going here. Yeah, so just wanted to let you know that that's how I'm here, and that's my process for being here, and that general understanding, and how much I'm learning from people from all around the world, because that embassy doesn't stop at the beach. You know, it kind of keeps going. No, it definitely keeps going. Yeah. So yeah, we're keeping it going. The book was an act of embassy. And true embassy is very intimate. And the book was a very intimate act of embassy that I thought would just be for a few hundred people. And I thought I could manage that many new relationships. But it ended up being, a lot of people. So yeah, I'm just still trying to figure out how to manage those relationships. So I've had 3 years to sort of stew on that book and marinate in not just my words, but everybody who reads that reads a different book. And so I've had the book told back to me from everybody's story. So many different, every day, an inbox full. And so many yarns with people from around the world for 3 years, and interviews every day, pretty much since then. My beautiful woman, Megan, can testify to that, how hard that's been. Not just hard, but really interesting as well, just to see everybody finds themselves mirrored in that book. And I think it's the intimacy of that embassy protocol of establishing that intimate relation of us two, the two of us, to start with, and then expanding that out into those ever increasing sort of nested, fractal, beautiful groups of governance that we have through those embassy protocols that can go as far as we need them to go. Probably into space if we want to talk to the other people out there. I did learn about that with the 7 directions here while I was here too. Had some teachings about that. Y'all know, you know about the 7 directions? I didn't know that before, but apparently I talked about it in there, and I didn't know that you have that north, south, east, west, but also up to Sky Camp and then down into the earth. And the interesting one though is the one at the center where each of us is sitting right now. So it's different for each one of us. And yeah, that's the one that goes to other dimensions and all that sort of thing, because it is so subjective. Yeah, so the book was an act of embassy, and I was just reaching out to share with a few hundred people, and I've shared with a lot more people and made those connections. But people have made connections with each other and yarned around this book with the different books that each person read, and it has facilitated embassy with a lot of different people, and that's been very surprising for us. Yeah, very surprising and really interesting. I'm still interested to see where it goes. So where did you guys take it?
Yeah, I just pulled out a quote that really compelled me, and then tried to corral my stream of consciousness into some coherent thing. But yeah, this what I have for y'all is kind of just my relationship with your book, and where it took me, and hopefully where it yeah, place for dialogue. So the quote I have here is, quote, "In our traditional systems of law, we remember, however, that everyone is an idiot from time to time. Especially in the space of academia, and often I think in the spaces of religion, we get wrapped up in wanting to know, in having to know. If we don't know as academics, then what are we worth, right? Like, that's our whole thing. We're supposed to know stuff. And in the institution of academia, more than anywhere, knowledge, production, and to a certain degree, perfection are the currencies of power, and that's how you ensure your success and your security. But even though we're from cultures across the world, this quote first made me giggle. And secondly, it gave me a sense of familiarity, right? Baked into Abenaki stories, even our origin story, is error. It's being an idiot. When the creator made us when we were stone people, we messed it up so bad that he shook the earth and broke us down and started us again as something different, as the ash people. Basically, all of our stories about Osban, the raccoon, our trickster figure, are about him being an idiot, and often a mean one, and messing up so he can teach us something. It's okay to be an idiot. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to not know. And of course, I'm not saying that not knowing is being an idiot in a negative sense. I'm simply using it as a jumping off point. We really have turned away from not knowing as a society. It's a sign of weakness. It's a sign of failure, of being lesser, but it shouldn't be at all. And that's not what my culture teaches me. When learning my traditional language, we de-emphasize writing, instead favor our oral tradition. We asked our teacher, why are you so reluctant to write down words for us so that we can write them in our notebooks? And he said, because it's okay to ask the same question over and over again, because it fosters strong and trusting relationships. It's not seen as a weakness or a flaw, and it encourages practice, right? And also in this learning space, in our immersion programs, we're taught that to see not knowing as a good thing. Because not knowing, not being able to participate in a conversation because maybe we aren't there with our fluency yet, it gives us the gift of simply being able to sit and to listen. And that is part of being in good relation, being a good community member. There are no conversations, there is no passing down of knowledge and culture without listeners to receive it. This is what we need, I think, to put into our students and into each other. Instead of the fear of failure, embrace the not knowing. Embrace asking questions, embrace needing help, embrace being one part of something bigger, remembering that our relationships to each other, we've forgotten that, and instead people have kind of channeled this fear of looking what they perceive to be weak or foolish into overcompensating and need for power and control. They have to control everything, control themselves, those around them, and we've seen this with the earth as well, right? Our desperate want to control her. And we also need to remember that knowing, and when you do have the privilege of knowing something, shouldn't be about power anyway. It should be about responsibility. I think that's what this whole book is saying. Not that Indigenous folks are the most powerful superheroes in the MCU and are gonna like sweep in and save the world. Instead, this book shows us that knowledge is about responsibility. Tyson states about mastering knowledge, quote, "First, check your ego and motives. Why are you doing this? Second, you don't need to be an expert to understand the knowledge processes of people from other cultures and enter into dialogues with them. More important, making yourself an expert in another culture is not always appreciated by the members of that culture." End quote. Folks need to remember that knowing isn't simply retention of information. When you know something, especially something tied to culture or faith, you are responsible for that knowledge. You are responsible for how you use it, for how it lives in you, and how you put it into the world. We are responsible to knowledge. Instead of thinking that knowledge is power or currency or simply a means of production, we should be thinking of it as a gift to share and receive, a responsibility to take care of it as well as to receive it. And the sharing is not only a way to pass down cultures and knowledges and languages, it's also a form of relationship building and a tool for being a good custodian, a good member of creation. And I do think that receiving knowledge and seeking knowledge is an equal responsibility to being the one who shares it. If you seek it for power or selfishness or to put yourself above others, that is on you. And it is not on the one who is kind enough to gift you with it. It's a question. So I make video games and I work on decolonial design and native representation in games. And I don't know how many times I have been asked the question, well, how do you keep people from appropriating it and messing with it and taking it and twisting it and modding it and doing something bad with it? And after reading this book, I really started to think, why is designing against bad actors my responsibility? Why aren't we pointing the finger at them? I'm creating something to share, to engage other people, to form meaningful relationships through play. But it happens with our cultures, whether they're in digital spaces or not, right? So we're just not allowed to like live our cultures openly because someone might have bad intentions and corrupt them. I don't think that's the way we should think about that. And this relates to the subject of narcissism that kind of weaves throughout this book. Tyson describes, this attitude of I am better than, I am greater than. And my culture, and I think a lot of indigenous cultures are pretty absent of this in terms of their structures and faith systems. So for us, there's no like ticket to ride, so to speak. Like everybody goes to the next place. It just happens. That's where you go. That's just the next step. You're to be a good person while you're here because you're taking care of the place your ancestors made for you. You're making a good place for those around you while you're here, and you're leaving something better for those that come after. The 7 generations, right? The Haudenosaunee philosophy that decisions we make today should result in a sustainable world for 7 generations into the future. Thinking about 7 generations is woven into a lot of things. It's also in the 7 directions, and it's in the practice of braiding sweetgrass. So these 3 strands all have 7 pieces of grass for the 7 directions, the 7 generations, and then the 3 pieces symbolize mind, body, and soul. So it's a part of our culture, our lived experience. And I want to point out this word sustainability because this is also one that every time I would hear it in the book, it was significant to me. It's also something present in the work of Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's a Potawatomi scholar. And she asks us, when we talk about sustainability, to ask, what is it that we are sustaining? Mm-hmm. Who is it being sustained for, and who is it sustainable for? I think we need to ask this question about not only our relationships with the environment, but so many of the structures of our lives. And I think for me, that was one of the biggest takeaways from this book, was to interrogate the structures of our lives, the relationships, the connections, from everything from our relationship with those around us, to the information we consume, to the food we eat, to our relationships as citizens of a state, of a land, and a world. We have to stop taking our relationships of all kinds for granted, and we need to be an active participant in them. We need to figure out what is wrong story and what is right story, and we need to do it together. That's kind of my thoughts.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I want to set straight how you say my name properly. So my name is Sousan Abadian, and a lot of my friends call me Dr. Seuss. So you can do that. So I'm Dr. Seuss for now. And it was not mentioned that, what am I doing on the stage with these 2 lovely people? I'm Zoroastrian Iranian by birth, and I consider us indigenous to the Iranian continent, and we have many of our spiritual traditions are very similar to the indigenous traditions that I have found around the world, and some of our history is also similar in that we lived under 1,400 years of basically takeover of our country and have been subjected to persecution and genocide. So we're about 20,000 left in Iran. It has made us stronger, but we still survive, and here we are, here I am. I also came to the indigenous world, in fact, owe a lot of gratitude to the communities here, because when I was doing my doctoral work, I ended up deciding to do work in the tribal communities in the US and Canada to learn about, I was in poverty alleviation. So I was looking at why were these communities stuck in cycles of poverty. And as I went into the communities and talked to them, what I learned from them, my intention was to go and give something back to the people from whom I had benefited, having come to this country. And of course, what happened is I still got more benefit from them than they have received from me. But what I learned was the histories of trauma and abuse that they'd experienced in residential boarding schools and the damage to culture. So in addition to government and public policy and economic development and anthropology, I also have a degree in cultural anthropology. I learned a lot about trauma, and I'm considered having an expertise. I hate this expertise though, but it is on collective trauma. What I do love is I've also learned something about what it takes to heal collective trauma, intergenerational trauma. So that is the other way in which I have learned about Indigenous communities. And then what happened was, in the process of hearing these stories from my relatives, they're my relatives here on this continent, it was a sort of remembrance. Because before then I hadn't really, how do I say this? I had taken on, and I still am, a universalist in that I believe myself to be, no soul has a religion or an ethnicity or a gender. And I identify mostly as a soul. But I have been asked to play this role here in this, not just here on this panel, but for now on this planet, as my role as a Zoroastrian Iranian. So I'm playing that role, and as an Indigenous person. But I'm not that, and none of you are that. But anyway, that's the role I'm playing. But in the remembrance of my Zoroastrian heritage from my Indigenous relatives, I got to see and remember what had happened actually to my own people. And so that's been a process. The Greeks and the Persians haven't always seen eye to eye, but I love Greek words. And there's a Greek word called anamnesis. That's about, I think it was a concept that Plato introduced at one point. And he believed that learning was really a matter of remembrance, that our soul comes here with some things that they've already known. And I think my connection with Indigenous peoples on this land and other places was an act of remembrance. I remembered things, and remembered a relationship to the land, and remembered a relationship to the earth and each other that was different than what I had been taught in Ivy League schools all my life, living in Washington, D.C., seat of power, some would say. And so it was a form of remembrance. The first time I came across the material that some of this wonderful, I love this book, and I love the man who created the book, and the amazing woman who supported him in creating this book, and everybody else. And some of these ideas of Indigenous thinking saving the world, I first came across in the 1990s. And I'm going to remember my friend Joyce Ferranti, who died in 2003 around this time of year. I took her to the hospital, to the emergency room, and 6 weeks later she died she had terminal cancer, it turned out, and she died. And I want to remember her, because she was a psychotherapist, this redheaded, blue-eyed psychotherapist from the south of the United States. And she had the courage to go with a group of people to Ecuador and visit the tribes, the Amazonian tribes there. And she had gone with some of her friends with checkbook in hand to help these communities. And what the shamans in those communities told her and the group was that they didn't have the problem that needed fixing. We have the problem in the West. And they asked Joyce and her friends to come back to the United States and transform the dream that we're dreaming here, that is damaging the world. And so she helped create an organization called Dream Change Coalition. And a man named John Perkins was, helped found, he's an author at this point. I don't know if any of you read his books, but it was called the Dream Change Coalition. And the idea was that they were coming here to transform the dream of the West. And what is that? What is our dream? Like, what are the destructive elements that we're dreaming into reality? And that was the task. And then what would we want to create? How would we want to create differently? So what new dream would we want to dream into being? And part of that is, I think this book addresses a lot of that. But that's the first time that I came across that idea of that we needed to change our dream here in the West. And what was that? What was the destructive elements in that dream? Not just in the West, also in the East, by the way, a lot of the world. And what elements do we need to shed? And how do we come back into right relations with each other, with the world, with the earth, and with ourselves? So she was a psychotherapist and she worked in the psychotherapeutic community, but that was the question I'm bringing her in to this room with us because I know she'd really enjoy being here right now if she was here. But I guess that's really the question, like what is the dream we're dreaming? I was mentioning to some people that I have a book that I wrote that is coming out this month, and it's called Generative Cultural Renewal. And it's really some of the lessons I learned when I went into tribal communities, because part of what I learned is the cultural damage that has been done to Indigenous communities. Part of the healing is, of course, healing from trauma, but the other part of the healing trauma is cultural renewal. And not all forms of cultural renewal are positive or generative. So, for example, Putin thinks that he's renewing culture in some ways in what he's doing in the Ukraine. I know in my own home country of Iran, they thought they were renewing culture when they had the revolution. Hitler thought he was renewing culture. So did the Serbs. So renewing culture can be dangerous. So how do we renew in ways that are actually generative? What does it mean to be generative? This book is it takes a certain slice. The next book I want to write is actually the bigger issue with Indigenous communities, how we renew our cultures in Indigenous communities. And I'm also involved in my own culture of trying to, because there's been a lot of damage. I mean, let's just say what's also true in that, now we're looked at, even in Iran, this is the symbol of my faith, my tradition. A lot of people are wearing this symbol because but a lot of Iranians are out. Many of us have forgotten, or it's lost. Like some of that stuff is lost. So how do we renew ourselves? What does it mean to renew ourselves? Because we also represent something for people. It's a responsibility. I've had this wonderful experiment I've run beginning in the spring. I was asked a year ago as part of this organization out of the UK called Confer. It works with psychotherapists and psychoanalysts, keeping around psychotherapeutic worlds, even though I'm not really formally trained in that world, but it just turns out that way in the healing trauma. So I was asked to give a talk on post-traumatic growth, and then they wanted me to create a group for psychotherapists and psychoanalysts as the first responders in the traumas we've experienced as a result of the pandemic. If there was something that I could offer them, because they themselves were burnt out, even though they were we think that they were the ones that would have the resources, right? But they were burnt out. So they'd asked me to go in there and I brought in a Celtic, he was a Scottish Druid priest, but also he's a psychotherapist. And he and I worked together. There's 45 people signed up, psychotherapists around the world. And we taught a course called An Invitation to the Sacred, Accessing Our Indigenous Wisdom. And it was a complete experiment. And it was really, there's a lot of wisdom we can't. I think Tyson's book also shares that there's stuff we can't share because it's not for everybody, but there are things we can share. So even basic things like learning to communicate with the earth in a certain way, or with the trees or rocks, or just seeing the world in a different way. Some of these people are living in urban settings. How do they communicate with the natural world? I mean, these are, so basic things. It was seven-week course, and it was an amazing success. A lot of people got a lot of value from it. And this is an experiment in that these are all mental people in their minds, very attached to their psychotherapeutic models. And we were talking to them about, how do you connect with a stone? How do you give it respect? How do you love your plant differently? How do you, there was a story of a shaman who came to New York City, and he had never been outside of his community before. out of the Amazon. And he walked around with his sandals and all these buildings. And after the end of the day, he was asked, what was it like for you? And he said, the buildings are lonely. Nobody prays to them. Nobody thanks them. They're fragments of the earth. And that kind of shift about like to honor everywhere we are. This room, the things that hold us, this chair, just the sacredness of where we are and how we live. So anyway, we're all running experiments on how do we connect differently to the earth. I think that's how we save, how do we save the planet? I've been asked to be a bridge of sorts to bring some of this material to people who normally don't come from this wisdom. I just want to end with one other, just last thing that feels a little bit hard for me to share because I have so much love and respect for the people who've invited me here. And I want to thank the Ansari Institute for inviting me here and also this beautiful place, the Notre Dame, for having us here and hosting this whole thing. Really, it's remarkable. And I'm so grateful for this opportunity. And I think one of my favorite parts of Tyson's, and should I ask you to read it? But one of my favorite parts of the book, there were so many. I couldn't even, I can't even begin to point out. But there was one piece that I really loved, and it was this part about the emu, and about. Would you like to read it for us? Would that be okay? Can I have trouble you to do that?
I also went blind over lockdown, COVID.
But your voice is beautiful. If we could
Vision before.
start it here, I was thinking here, and then just read it to the end of that, if that's okay.
Okay.
That's okay.
Effort. Emu. All right. Emu's problem can be seen in the mathematical greater than, less than interpretation of the symbol. So that's that symbol. That's from Omenjuma, Fijo. So it just looks like greater than, less than symbols, but it's the direction that different animals' legs bend at the knee. So it's mammals this way, and then avian that way, and that's two halves of a totemic system. There's a lot in that, but there's also this. Okay, so emu's problem can be seen in the mathematical greater than, less than interpretation of that symbol. Emu is a troublemaker who brings into being the most destructive idea in existence. I am greater than you, you are less than me. This is the source of all human misery. Aboriginal society was designed over thousands of years to deal with this problem. Some people are just idiots, and everybody has a bit of idiot in them from time to time, coming from some deep place inside that whispers, you are special. You are greater than other people and things. You are most important, more important than everything and everyone process. All things and all people exist to serve you. This behavior needs massive checks and balances to contain the damage it can do. I'm down.
Would you mind?
There are a lot of stories that explain how all this began. And as a Brolga boy, traditional enemy of emu, I know them all. My favorite one comes from Noongar elder Noel Nannup in Perth, who tells the dreaming story of a meeting in which all the species sat down for a yarn to decide which one would be the custodial species for all of creation. Emu made a hell of a mess, running around, showing off his speed and claiming his superiority, demanding to be boss and shouting over everyone. You can see the dark shape of emu in the Milky Way. Kangaroo, his head the Southern Cross, is holding him down. Echidna is grasping him from behind, and the great serpent is coiled around his legs. Containing the excesses of malignant narcissists is a team effort.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love it because I think it's a team effort. We're here in a group that is faithful. It's about religion. We're here as a group in religion. So I'm going to say something that's obvious, but some of our religions come from a perspective of being better than others. And we really need to address this. I think we skirt around it. You know, those of us who are in interfaith gatherings, we're all so nice. We want to be nice, and we all agree that we're all equal. But we don't say that actually there are faiths that believe they are the one way to God. They're the only way to God. They're the best way to God. They're the last word on God. And that way of thinking has to go. And that's what's different about Indigenous ways of thinking. That is the main thing that's different. Indigenous ways of thinking don't believe that. They don't believe they have the one best way. They understand that there's a plurality. So what Indigenous ways of thinking can save the world? This Indigenous way of thinking can save the world. And we have to work to clean this narcissism up. It's caused so much damage. So I'm just going to end there. Questions?
20 minutes, so I don't know if, Tyson, you want to respond to anything, if you have any thoughts, or?
It just occurred to me how often I use the word idiot.
I loved it. I was super on board.
Look, so a Greek fella told me that that's a Greek word, and that
Of course you could say that.
the original, every word is Greek.
Yeah, no.
Every word in the world is Greek. But yeah, no, this particular one, he said the original meaning of it, he said idiota or something. He said the original meaning of it was somebody who becomes disconnected from the relationships around them, not just with people, but with place and non-humans as well. So a person in a state of disconnection, that's what an idiot is. It's not somebody with reduced cognitive capacity. So I thought I should say that.
That's good.
That's important. And I also should say, I should also, I wasn't very nice to emu people in the book, you know, and that's me coming from my Brolga-based faith, you might call it, you know, because we put them on the outside. But I mean, some of my best friends are emus, and they would say the other way, like, you know, for emu people, there's a lot of really good story that I neglected to put in there, like particularly fatherhood. Emu is the dreaming that you have to learn how to be a good father, because that emu mother, you know, she just runs off as soon as she lays eggs. She never comes back. She's gone, and it's the daddy that's left to care for the eggs, to sit on the eggs, and then to rear all the chicks to adulthood. And that's seen as the ideal and optimal model for fatherhood. That you know, in most of our cultures, that you do have a lot of responsibility and obligation, and that's not just to your fruit of your loins. That's to all of your brothers and cousins' children as well. Yeah, you have that responsibility there. Yeah. So I think that's important. That we're talking about interfaith, and I've just completely slammed somebody else's point of view. It's important.
Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah,
Because I could say something else, but I want to make sure people.
I know someone has a question about
Humans.
There's a microphone for the benefit of the online audience.
Yeah, I have a question. What's the correct way with the right faith? Is it need wisdom? Does it need spiritual? What does it really need?
no more abstract nouns to describe these things. I think once we're so embedded in land and place and relation in the right way that we no longer need abstract nouns like nature and faith, wisdom, knowledge. When we no longer need these words to describe these things because they're actually embedded in everything we do in our daily practice, then we might be able to answer that question. We probably won't want to answer it anymore. I don't know. It'd be good to get back to that. I think most humans were there about 5 minutes ago, and we're all trying to get back. Did you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Can you introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah. My name is Bash. I live around here. I'm a physician.
How do you make sure that all politicians around the world read this book?
Sorry, I missed that. How do you make sure?
The politicians, the politicians around the world, and I doubt they will be able to understand that, but someone will have to translate it for them first.
Yeah,
Take 'em on a-
I think they're like everybody and they just take what they want. They see, I know quite a few politicians have read that and I've heard the way they've spoken about it. And I think people just, people will project what they're going to project and they'll extract what they're going to extract. And then everyone else will just sort of come into dialogue.
I find that it's giving people experiences is more valuable than having them read stuff. So with these, for example, these people that I've worked with who tend to be very heady and caught, stuck in their ways in a way, you could talk to them and that's good. You have to bring in the mind. I'm good at that too. And these guys are really good at that. But you have to give them an experience and then that changes them over time, give them experiences. So, that's what I try to do anyway.
Thank you so much for your very intellectual session. My name is Pavitra Rajendran. I'm an LLM student of human rights. I would like to have insights about my own country. So 2 years back, I got an opportunity to work with indigenous people of our country, so-called Braddas. Some decades ago, they are reluctant to work with other people. They are not engaged with any people. But now, because of the educational system, they are coming to the campus and are learning and all things are happening. Those are positive also. But still, when we are inquiring about their dignity and right to life, they said after getting the education, most of the people of their indigenous community thinking about being Western or being normal people, being local people is good and not being indigenous people is not good. That is their problem. So what he mentioned is forgetting their cultural practices and not engaging with their own after getting the education is violation of their dignity. What do you think about that? I would like to inquire about that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is something, obviously like that, speaking to the North American kind of perspective, like this is something that happens in communities here too. It's commonly referred to as brain drain from communities, right? And we have this problem of like Indigenous youth going out, getting educated, and then coming back and either feeling disconnected or their communities feeling having a lack of trust, or like, what did you go do that for? What did you even learn? What is it? What are you going to use that for? That kind of thing, right? And I think some of that, especially here, you see because of what happened in boarding schools and residential schools, right? These kids got taken away and their culture was completely erased. They would go, if they got lucky, to go back to their families, couldn't even speak to them anymore because they forgot their language, right? They were completely removed. They were no longer indigenous, right? For all intents and purposes, that was the goal. So I think there's still some like residual fears of those and like seeing that happen around the world, seeing cultures be erased, because you think about educational institutions, they're built for one kind of person and one kind of learning, and like they have a mission, they have a goal, and it's hard to be in those spaces. And I mean, for me personally, I love academia, I love what I do, but I do find it hard to be in these kinds of spaces, right? They try to shape you and they try to change you and break you down and make you something different. So I think there needs to be kind of collective understanding on both sides. People who go into those systems and come back, recognizing the fear of what that fear is, right? That something's going to be changed, that it's extractive now, that you're not a part of this community anymore. And there needs to be an understanding on the side that, was receiving, saying like, I want to give this person a chance. They went and did this thing to maybe help us. What can they do now that maybe we didn't have access to before? In what way can they be good to our community and connect us to other things and, to help us? Because I do think a lot of Indigenous folks who seek education, what we're trying to do is to find a way, that our best way to give back, right? So I think it's a lack of understanding on both sides is often the problem, and we need to have a dialogue about that, and that like the fear is okay and it's understandable, but we need to address where it's coming from and then talk about how do we manage that? How do we build bridges and stuff?
In Indigenous knowledge, all things are in relation. So Indigenous knowledge is a method of inquiry that explores the way everything in creation is connected and related. That's it. It frustrates me that people see that as creation ending at modernity, that somehow modernity is separate from creation. And, you know, my people have that misconception, that wrong story. And, you know, people who are, you know, the custodians of modernity also have that misconception about Indigenous knowledge, that somehow there's a barrier between the two, but I can't see that. It's all creation. It's one thing. So I never stop, you know, with my Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous thinking, Indigenous inquiry. I don't recognize those boundaries. So for me, that just continues. But it's endlessly frustrating. There are always a lot of gatekeepers there throwing up, whoa, that's not Indigenous, that's engineering, you know.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, that's in creation too, and I'm part of that. It is really difficult. I think we all are sort of damaged and abused by that misconception and that big wrong story, that myth of progress that comes from the myth of primitivism. You have to have those. You have to have a brutish, horrible Hobbesian past in order to show some kind of glorious, progressive present and an even better future. But I think we're all starting to question that timeline at this point in history, and that arrow of progress as a continuous arrow of growth and evolution, resulting in ending with the Nordic male on all the charts. And then I guess everybody hoping for the next iteration, which will be some kind of cyborg attachments on that Nordic male, and we'll see where it all ends up from there. Yeah, but I just think I know there's more to it than that, and all of us know there's more to it than that. And I don't know why we have to keep waiting. Every time we speak, it has to be from within the frames of the biggest idiot in the room. You know what I mean? An idiot in the Greek sense of the word. But you know, it's probably worth reframing things from time to time for the most connected people in a room, and looking at creation that way. So it's all about Indigenous knowledge is about retrieving things forward. You know, it's not about disappearing into a British past, but it's about retrieving things forward always, because you are in a deep time continuum, you know, in which your ancestors are present, but your descendants are also present in any given moment, and you're accountable to all of those relations, human and non-human.
I don't know if we answered your question. Was there something?
Yeah.
Yes, I do have a question. Indigenous people, their ideas, their beliefs, they have been overwhelmed by the people who came, the new arrivals. The new arrivals came with better ideas. They were more progressive, they were more enterprising. How did you have Indigenous people bring their own ideas and come with the new arrivals and preserve them? Naturally, otherwise, the new arrivals look at the world very differently. It's a progressive word. And that just leaves them behind. And that's what exactly happened. It's happened in many parts of the world. Hundreds of the languages have disappeared of Indigenous people. And that's just because the way the world is. It's a progressive word.
Is it though?
No.
I don't know if creation is progressive. I don't know if any of our faiths would support the notion that creation is about progress and refinement. I think it's certainly about complexity, and it's certainly about relatedness and increasing those relations. But I don't know if it's about growth for almost every faith. I think even Satanists wouldn't, you know, if really pressed, I don't think they would adhere to that. But although they might. That was probably a bad example.
I think it also, like, I'm really prone to questioning this idea of progress. What does that mean? Like, is it always a good thing? You know, I mean, there's this really lovely Simon Ortiz short story called Men on the Moon about a Indigenous fella witnessing the moon landing on his first ever television set, and his grandson is translating for him, and he's watching it, and then he has this dream about these like monsters and on the moon, and he has all these questions about like, why are they going there? Well, what are they bringing back? Is the thing that they're going to bring back maybe bad? And he's really questioning this idea of progress, and like sometimes I feel like human beings just do things for the sake of being able to do them without thinking at all about the ramifications of that. We can see that with the way that our world is right now, in a lot of ways, societally and also environmentally. And so I think we like really have to question this idea of progress. Progress for who, and what is it doing? And yeah, I just think that's kind of something that we get super caught up in, this idea of progress. And this also going back to the, coming in with ideas that Tyson speaks about in his book, this like narcissism that like one is better than the other, and that's a mistake. That belief is inherently a mistake. That to think that we're coming in and our ideas are better because they're different and newer or whatever that means. But yeah, the idea of progress is something that I find really troubling.
Yeah, and also I think this idea that the new ones who come are more progressive. I mean, this notion of human rights, for example, or liberty and freedom, we think we've created it in the West. But I can tell you for sure that this idea, for example, existed in the East thousands of years ago. And I'm sure it might have existed in Africa, or in the Zoroastrian context, we believed in people's freedom of thought. A child even had to pick their own religion. You couldn't impose a faith on them. When Cyrus when he invaded lands, he freed people, he freed slaves, he rebuilt temples. He didn't impose his own religion on the people he let. So this is thousands of years ago. So the idea that we're now, we're so progressed, we've come up with, all this notion of freedom. Yeah, we have progressed in some ways, possibly, in some, so some of these ideas have been around a long time, and we're rediscovering them, maybe in a little different way, but they're not very necessarily new. So I don't know, just piggybacking on what Ashlee was saying, what do we mean by progress? And is it something that has been brought to us, or from the new people, or maybe I know the Anishinaabe, for example. I mean, talk about freedom and freedom of thought, and that stuff has been there here a long time. It wasn't brought in by the United States, or the American Constitution. So just this notion, I think, is not necessarily a true notion, that the new people come in, bring progress, and then the more simple people who are connected to the natural world in a different way are somehow primitive, and they don't have. I mean, so I think that whole concept needs to be looked at.
Wrong story.
Wrong story, wrong story, and partly why we're here, right? I mean, the way the world is, something's not working, something's not right. So it isn't. We're not progressing. We just maybe didn't. There's a clip from a movie on the role of companies, and anyway, it's a clip from someone who's trying to fly. It's early before we discovered planes, and he's taking off from the hill, and he's flapping his wings, and he looks like he's actually going to fly. And the camera zooms in, he's got this ecstatic look on his face, and he's got these, metal wings as a metaphor for our civilization connected to his arms. And so for that moment, he looks like he's flying and he's ecstatic. But if you wait long enough, and if you zoom out, you see that he's actually falling and he hasn't figured it out yet. And so we look like we have progress, but maybe it's that little moment in time where we're zooming in and thinking, okay, we're doing so great, but let's wait 1,000 years, let's see where we are now. So I just want to question, again, this notion of where we are and what progress is. I think a gentleman here wants to ask, I do want to let him ask a question.
I'm not sure if I have an observation question, but it's all of the above. But as I think about the sins of the past, I think about the goals that we're setting out for us. I think one of the biggest problems is always getting from where we've been to where we go. It seems like the time frame historically that we put before ourselves for a solution
is the 4 years of presidency or the every 2 years of election, and all of a sudden that becomes our time frame within which to make any change. And as I look back, I think that we do ourselves a great disservice by not making sure that this is, if it took us thousands of years to get to that situation, it's probably going to take us that long to get it right. And it seems like the dialogue is always missing about how do you break up the solution so that it becomes realistic, so that it encompasses the economic effects, the psychological effects, the changes in family definition, and all of the above. I just like some comments.
Before the comments, so you know the title says a yarning session. A yarn is actually ideally between two people, and it can be open-ended. So I'm watching the time, and this could go on forever, and we're not going to, and the conversation will actually go on. I saw a couple of other hands, but Dean Scott Appleby wanted to comment on the previous speaker's point, and then perhaps you can offer final reflections as we drift into the break, but keep these thoughts with you because they'll continue with us through the symposium. So is that okay?
Thank you for your question. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm following up on the gentleman's question just now, not to interrupt him, but to build on the question. And the question about policy, or will the politicians, what can we do? So I do have a question related to that. Of course, there's a windup. First of all, is to thank you, Ty, and this is a question for the whole panel, but also our author. I do believe that because so many of us, maybe all of us in this room, want to see constructive change in the sensibilities and practices and policies, we care so much about the future of the planet, that we do need to get the message out to a variety of publics and to have them really reflect, take it seriously. So that's at least, I think, a goal we share. There is a richly deserved, well-earned, and absolutely necessary deep polemical tone to the book and to the discourse. And one who could deny it? An anger, a resentment, etc. I think many of us share it, and some more deeply who've experienced it. So that's not the question. The question is, do you believe it is possible, not naive or misguided, and is it too much to ask that in the engagement with audiences of various kinds who might help to make constructive change, the dialogue can move beyond polemic? I mean, are these, maybe polemic's not the right word, but move beyond witness, testimony to the past, what has done, the situation, absolutely necessary. Can we move beyond this? It's such a delicate question because it'd be easy for me to say yes, but I haven't suffered from this. So it's really a very sincere question, not rhetorical. How can we use encounter dialogue, respectful engagement, not to forget the moral seriousness of what has happened, but is there a way to move to the next step, or is that naive to think that we can cut through that? Is that a clear question, I hope? Okay, thank you.
I think that, yeah, that has to be done. I don't think we can do that collectively. You know, I don't think every woman in this room would be prepared to tear up her historical IOUs. You know what I mean? Before things have been settled. But many would. And I guess, you know, and that's and it's good to sit down with people who are willing to shed that. And then, but then it's also, I don't know, that's a big leap of faith because you're assuming the other person you're talking to is not going to be wielding their unwarranted, unearned power and privilege over you. during that exchange. And I guess it takes a matter of existing in a state of no fear about such things, about your own subsequent loss of power and dignity as you go along. And I guess to the idea about, innovation, progress, all these sorts of things. I guess any new innovation, as with any new dialogue, connection that way, or progress within these things, any new innovation technologically, it has to be accompanied by an equally powerful social technology or psychological technology that can ensure that the new technological innovation will not ever be able to be weaponized. We tend to put these things out innocently, and they do tend to get taken up by mad science and weaponized around the place. Maybe there's an answer for both those things in the law about Tesla. He's on my mind because we saw the place where he was doing his early work at Niagara when we visited there the other day. And I'm aware of that in the law, and I'm not sure if it's true or not, but there's lots of conspiracy theorists online who talk about how he did create some kind of big, very powerful technology, but he was worried that it would be weaponized and would destroy the world. And so he broke the blueprints up into different parts and all the formulas, and he sent some to Russia, and he sent some to the US, and some to Asia, and some to Europe, and then said, when you're ready to use this technology, well, that'll be the day when you're all getting together and working together with those things. I doubt that's a true story, but it's right story, it's right story. And I guess, so we need those really appropriately sophisticated, nuanced social technologies and psychotechnologies to accompany, all the innovation. And, and it's as complex as figuring out ways that we can come to equal dialogue when things are skewed, historically and currently and everything else. I'm down for it though. I don't care. I'm happy. I'll talk to anybody. I even talk to flat earthers. I'm good.
I just wondered why it has to be either or. Like maybe in some of the conversations I've had, we've talked about some of the stuff that's painful for people, and then it builds trust, and then we can get beyond it. So maybe in the beginning, some of you will have to be representatives and receive anger, unfortunately, because you're so generous to do so, because you don't, of course, deserve it. But in the beginning, maybe a little bit of that. But then trust gets built, healing happens, and we can move beyond. It can happen quickly. It doesn't have to be, people just need space sometimes to talk about things that are hurting them. So, yeah.
Okay, we're going to take a break now. We will be back in this room at 3:30. Dr. Seuss.
Yes.
Thank you.
So welcome.